The void between stars held secrets that most species never discovered. Captain Jenna Blackwood knew this better than anyone, as she floated motionless in her stealth reconnaissance pod, watching the massive Crimson warships patrol the edge of human space. For 3 months, she and Lieutenant Rico Vasquez had been ghosts in the darkness, documenting every movement, every communication, every weakness of the alien force that called itself the Crimson Syndicate. Rico's voice crackled softly through their encrypted channel. Another supply convoy just jumped in. Same formation as always. These guys really don't believe in changing their patterns. Jenna adjusted her position slightly, keeping the enemy fleet in view through her pod's advanced sensors. The Syndicate ships were beautiful in a terrifying way. Their hulls gleamed like fresh blood under the distant starlight, covered in jagged spikes and weapon arrays that screamed of violence and domination. Each vessel was easily 3 times the size of humanity's largest battleships, bristling with enough firepower to glass a planet. "Count the weapons again," Jenna whispered. "Command needs exact numbers." As Rico worked, Jenna's mind wandered to the intercepted transmissions they'd recorded weeks ago. The Syndicate had discovered humanity through routine deep space scanning, picking up entertainment broadcasts and commercial signals from Earth. What followed was exactly what she'd expected from a species that had enslaved 47 different civilizations in the past century. The recording still made her blood boil. Overlord Kethvar, the Syndicate's regional warlord, had laughed when presented with data about human settlements. His translator had rendered his words with clinical precision. Another soft species broadcasting their weakness to the galaxy. Their transmissions speak of peace, cooperation, entertainment. They will make excellent slaves once their spirit is properly broken. Huntress Zex Thea, the Syndicate's most feared tracker, had been even more dismissive. These humans appear to have no natural weapons, no enhanced physical capabilities, no psychic abilities. They rely entirely on crude technology and social cooperation. A species that creates art and music instead of focusing on warfare will fall within days of our arrival. The alien leaders had no idea that every word was being recorded by devices smaller than grains of sand, planted by advanced human scouts who had been moving through Syndicate territory for over a year. Humanity had learned long ago that the galaxy was full of predators. The smart prey learned to watch the hunters. Rico finished his count and transmitted the data. 47 heavy cruisers, 12 dreadnoughts, and that flagship that's bigger than some moons. Plus about 300 smaller vessels. They've got enough firepower here to take on half the known galaxy. Jenna nodded grimly. The Syndicate always brought overwhelming force to their conquests. It was their signature move. Roll up with enough ships to block out the sun, demand surrender, and when the inevitable resistance came, they would demonstrate why resistance was futile. Species after species had fallen to this exact strategy. But the Syndicate had made one critical error in their assessment of humanity. They assumed that a species focused on cooperation and creativity would be soft, weak, unprepared for real conflict. They never considered that the same traits that created beautiful art and moving music might also create the most deviously effective military strategies the galaxy had ever seen. The proof was floating all around them in the darkness. The Syndicate thought they were alone in this system, preparing for their grand entrance into human space. In reality, they were surrounded by hundreds of human observation posts, each one smaller than a fighter craft, each one invisible to Syndicate sensors, each one recording everything. "Movement on the flagship," Rico reported. "Looks like they're preparing to broadcast another one of their demands." The transmission began exactly as expected. Overlord Kethavar's image appeared on every human communication network simultaneously. His reptilian features twisted into what his species probably considered an intimidating expression. His red-scaled hide gleamed under the harsh lights of his command bridge, and his forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke. "Primitive humans of the third planet, you have attracted the attention of the Crimson Syndicate. Your species shows promise as laborers and servants. Submit immediately, and your deaths will be swift and merciful. Resist, and we will demonstrate Why 47 civilizations have learned to kneel before our might. You have one rotation of your planet to surrender unconditionally. The transmission ended, and across human space, emergency meetings began. But Jenna wasn't worried about those meetings. She knew exactly how they would go because humanity had been preparing for this exact scenario for decades. The galaxy was full of predator species that viewed cooperation as weakness and creativity as uselessness. Most prey species fell quickly because they tried to fight the predators on the predators' terms. Humanity had learned a different approach entirely. Rico, start packing up the surveillance gear. Phase 1 is complete. Already? But they just delivered their ultimatum. Jenna smiled as she began powering down her systems. That wasn't an ultimatum, partner. That was the Syndicate telling us exactly how they think, exactly how they operate, and exactly what they expect us to do. Phase 2 starts the moment we get this intel back to command. As their stealth pods began the long journey back to human space, neither of them spoke about what was coming next. They didn't need to. Both had read the classified reports about Project Mousetrap, humanity's response to the growing threat of galactic predator species. The Crimson Syndicate thought they were about to hunt weak prey. What they were actually about to discover was that humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of making predators into prey. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and they would never see it coming until the trap snapped shut around them. Behind them, the Crimson Fleet continued its patrol patterns, confident in their overwhelming superiority. They had no idea that every ship movement, every communication, every tactical decision was being recorded and analyzed by the species they had dismissed as helplessly primitive. The hunt was about to begin, but not the way the Syndicate expected. The first Syndicate attack came exactly 24 hours after their ultimatum expired, just as Commander Tyler Brooks had predicted. From his position in the Deep Space Command Center, he watched the tactical displays with cold satisfaction, as Crimson warships descended upon the mining colony of Haven's Rest like vultures sensing weakness. "They're following the pattern perfectly," he murmured to his tactical officer. "Full frontal assault, maximum intimidation, minimal actual strategy." Dr. Nina Petrova looked up from her xenobiology workstation, her dark eyes gleaming with excitement. 3 months of studying captured Syndicate genetic material had finally yielded results that could change everything. "Tyler, you need to see this. I've found something incredible about their physiology." But Brooks held up a hand, his attention focused on the unfolding battle. On the surface of Haven's Rest, the colonists were putting up exactly the kind of resistance he'd ordered. Not too strong, not too weak. Just enough to make the Syndicate work for their victory while appearing authentically desperate. War Chief Mordak commanded the Syndicate ground forces with typical brutality. His massive form, covered in chitinous plates and bearing 6 muscular arms, moved through the colonial streets like a living tank. Each step left cracks in the concrete as he directed his troops to strategic positions. "Burn the cultural centers first," he commanded through his translator. "Art and music facilities breed defiance. Then secure the manufacturing plants. These humans will learn that resistance brings only suffering." What Mordak didn't know was that every move he made was being transmitted directly to human command. The desperate colonists had been equipped with microtransmitters woven into their clothing. Every tactical decision, every weakness in Syndicate formation, every piece of equipment they used was being cataloged and analyzed. The colonists themselves were volunteers, carefully selected for their acting ability as much as their courage. They screamed in terror at exactly the right moments, fled in perfectly choreographed panic, and provided just enough real resistance to maintain the illusion while ensuring the Syndicate learned nothing useful about human military capabilities. Seeker Vexlin watched the operation from her stealth ship, her 4 eyes recording everything with cold efficiency. As the Syndicate's top intelligence operative, she prided herself on reading the deeper patterns of species behavior. Something about the human response felt wrong, but she couldn't identify what. "The humans are reacting within expected parameters," she reported to the fleet. "Fear responses are genuine, resistance is minimal and poorly coordinated. However, their retreat patterns show unusual organization for a supposedly panicked population. Brooks smiled as he heard the intercepted transmission. Vexilin was dangerous precisely because she was smart enough to sense something was off. That was why Phase 2 included specific measures to feed her suspicions in carefully controlled directions. "Nina, what did you find?" he asked, finally turning his attention to the xenobiologist. Dr. Petrova's excitement was barely contained as she pulled up her research data. The syndicate species has a fascinating weakness. Their nervous system operates on a completely different biochemical basis than most carbon-based life. They use a copper-based neural transmission system instead of the more common sodium-potassium exchange. In simple terms, Doctor. In simple terms, Commander, they're vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses in a very specific frequency range. Not the broad-spectrum EMP we usually use, but a narrow-band pulse that would shut down their nervous systems without affecting human or most other alien physiology. Brooks felt a cold smile spread across his face. How specific is this vulnerability? I can tune the frequency to target their exact neural resonance. One pulse properly calibrated would paralyze every syndicate soldier in the affected area. They'd be conscious but unable to move for approximately 6 hours. The implications were staggering. The syndicate's greatest advantage was their physical superiority. Most species they conquered were simply overwhelmed by the aliens' size, strength, and natural weapons. But if humanity could neutralize that advantage at will, the entire dynamic of the conflict would change. On Haven's Rest, the battle was reaching its predetermined conclusion. The colonists had retreated to their final defensive positions, putting up valiant but ultimately futile resistance. Mordak's forces closed in for what they believed would be the killing blow. Humans fight with more spirit than expected, the OI war chief reported, but they lack coordination and proper weapons. Their defeat is inevitable. We will have this colony secured within 2 standard time units. What Mordak couldn't see were the hundreds of microscopic sensors his troops had unknowingly carried into the colony. Every weapon signature, every piece of armor, every tactical communication was being recorded and transmitted to human analysts. By the time the Syndicate claimed victory, humanity would know more about their military capabilities than most Syndicate commanders. The final act of the Haven's Rest Theater was perfectly choreographed. The colonists made their last stand at the community center, fighting with farming tools and improvised weapons. They held out just long enough to seem genuinely heroic before being overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. As the Syndicate raised their crimson banners over the conquered colony, they had no idea they had just walked into the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. Vexilin's final report reflected her growing unease. Victory achieved with minimal casualties to Syndicate forces. Human resistance was fierce but ultimately ineffective. However, I recommend caution in future operations. These humans show unusual tactical awareness for a species without military tradition. Her concerns were noted and dismissed by the Syndicate leadership. After all, they had just won a crushing victory exactly as predicted. The humans had fought bravely and died honorably, just like 47 other species before them. Brooks watched the final transmissions from Haven's Rest with grim satisfaction. Every single piece of data they needed had been collected. The volunteers had played their parts perfectly, and their sacrifice would save millions of human lives in the battles to come. Phase 2 complete, he announced to his staff. Begin Phase 3 preparations. Send the signal to Admiral Mitchell. It's time to spring the trap. Nina looked up from her research station. Tyler, there's something else. The neural vulnerability I discovered, it gets worse for them. Extended exposure to the specific frequency actually causes permanent damage to their memory centers. We could essentially erase their knowledge of advanced tactics. The commander's expression grew darker. The Syndicate thought they were fighting another primitive species that would break under pressure. Instead, they had stumbled into a carefully orchestrated web spun by humanity's greatest strategic minds. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on a dozen other human colonies. Each defeat provided more intelligence. Each victory drew the Syndicate deeper into human space. Each step forward took them closer to the killing ground. where Admiral Mitchell waited with the full might of Earth's hidden fleet. The Syndicate had conquered 47 civilizations using the same brutal tactics. They expected humans to be number 48. What they were about to discover was that humanity had been studying every single one of those previous conquests, learning from each defeated species' mistakes and preparing the perfect counter to every Syndicate strategy. The web was tightening, and the hunters were about to become the hunted. Admiral Grace Mitchell stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Defiance, watching as the largest military fleet in Syndicate history dropped out of hyperspace directly into humanity's trap. 40,000 Crimson warships filled the void around Earth's outer defense perimeter, their hulls gleaming with weapons that could shatter moons. It was exactly what she had been waiting for. "All stations report ready, Admiral," her tactical officer announced. "Operation Mousetrap is green across all sectors." Mitchell nodded calmly. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment. Every human defeat, every strategic retreat, every piece of intelligence gathered by brave volunteers had been building toward this single, decisive engagement. The Syndicate thought they were about to claim their greatest prize. Instead, they were about to learn why humanity had survived every predator Earth had ever produced. Supreme Dominator Krexthor commanded the Syndicate armada from his massive flagship, a vessel so large it had its own gravitational field. His 12-foot frame was covered in ceremonial armor, crafted from the metals of conquered worlds, each piece representing a civilization that had knelt before Syndicate might. "Begin the final demonstration," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Let these humans witness the futility of resistance. Activate the planet crackers." Shadowblade Nixara moved through the flagship's corridors like liquid death, her form barely visible even to Syndicate sensors. As the Empire's most elite assassin, she had been tasked with eliminating any human leaders who might inspire continued resistance after the conquest. Her forearms each carried weapons capable of cutting through starship armor, and her enhanced reflexes could dodge weapons fire that moved at light speed. "The human leadership will be eliminated within moments of planetfall," she reported. "Their command structure will collapse before organized resistance can form." What none of the Syndicate forces knew was that they had jumped directly into the most sophisticated military trap in galactic history. Every approach vector had been predicted, every tactical option had been accounted for, and every single ship in their massive fleet was already locked onto by weapons they couldn't detect. Sergeant Devon Cross crouched in his stealth armor among the asteroid field that ringed the outer system, surrounded by 10,000 of humanity's finest special forces operators. Each soldier was equipped with the new EMP weapons Dr. Petrova had designed, calibrated to the exact frequency that would paralyze Syndicate nervous systems. "Remember," he whispered into his comm unit, "these aliens have conquered 47 civilizations by making their enemies afraid. Today we show them what fear really looks like." The Syndicate's opening move was as predictable as sunrise. Massive energy weapons designed to crack planetary crusts charged to full power, aimed directly at Earth's major population centers. It was their signature intimidation tactic, used successfully on dozens of worlds. But as the weapons fired, something impossible happened. The devastating energy beams struck invisible barriers and dissipated harmlessly into space. Shield generators that had been hidden throughout the solar system for over a decade suddenly revealed themselves, creating an impenetrable defensive network around Earth. Krexthor's 4 eyes widened in shock. "Impossible. Our intelligence indicated these humans possessed no advanced defensive technology." Admiral Mitchell smiled coldly as she opened a communication channel to the Syndicate flagship. "Supreme Dominator Krexthor, this is Admiral Grace Mitchell of the Terran Defense Force. Your intelligence was exactly what we wanted you to believe." The truth began to dawn on the Syndicate leadership. Every piece of information they had gathered about humanity had been carefully fed to them through their own intelligence networks. Every victory they had achieved had been orchestrated to make them overconfident. Every weakness they thought they had identified had been an elaborate deception. "You see," Mitchell continued, "humanity studied every single one of your previous conquests. We learned from the mistakes of 47 civilizations. We discovered that you always use the same tactics, always rely on the same intimidation strategies, and always underestimate species that value cooperation over domination. The Syndicate fleet tried to regroup, but their formations had been designed for overwhelming weaker opponents, not for fighting an enemy that knew their every move before they made it. As they attempted to maneuver into attack positions, the trap finally sprung. From hidden positions throughout the solar system, humanity's true fleet revealed itself. Ships emerged from stealth fields, rose from planetary surfaces, and dropped out of hyperspace in perfect coordination. But these weren't the primitive vessels the Syndicate expected. These were warships incorporating technology reverse-engineered from every species the Syndicate had ever conquered. Dr. Petrova's neural disruptors fired first. Narrow-band EMP pulses swept through the Syndicate formations, and suddenly, thousands of alien warriors found themselves paralyzed within their own ships. Bridge crews collapsed at their stations, unable to move or speak, their copper-based nervous systems completely overwhelmed. Devon Cross and his special forces struck next. Boarding pods launched from hidden positions, punching through Syndicate hulls with precision strikes. But instead of meeting armed resistance, the human soldiers found ships full of helpless aliens, paralyzed by their own biology's vulnerability to humanity's new weapons. Target secured, Cross reported as his team took control of a Syndicate heavy cruiser. No casualties on either side. The neural disruptors work exactly as designed. Across the battlefield, the same scene played out on thousands of Syndicate vessels. Human boarding parties took control of ship after ship without firing a single lethal shot. The aliens remained conscious and aware, but completely unable to resist as their own fleet was captured around them. Nixara tried desperately to reach her assigned targets but found herself trapped aboard a flagship that was no longer under Syndicate control. Human soldiers moved through the corridors with confidence born of complete tactical superiority, their EMP weapons making her legendary, combat skills irrelevant. Supreme Dominator Krexthor could only watch in growing horror as his invincible armada was systematically captured by an enemy he had dismissed as primitive prey. His own body was paralyzed by the neural disruptors, leaving him conscious but helpless as human marines secured his command bridge. Admiral Mitchell's voice echoed through every captured Syndicate vessel. For 3 years, you believed you were hunting humanity. In reality, you were being hunted by us. Every battle you won was a lesson we learned. Every tactic you used was a weakness we cataloged. Every step toward Earth brought you deeper into our web. The final phase of Operation Mousetrap was the most devastating of all. As the paralyzed Syndicate forces watched helplessly, human technicians began downloading every piece of information from their ship's computers. Military tactics, conquered world locations, slave population data, technological specifications, everything the Syndicate had learned in centuries of conquest was now in human hands. You wanted to add humanity to your list of conquered species, Mitchell continued. Instead, you've given us everything we need to liberate every civilization you've enslaved. The 47 worlds you conquered are about to learn that their liberation is at hand. The Syndicate had made one critical error in their assessment of humanity. They assumed that a species focused on cooperation and creativity would be weak in the face of superior force. They never considered that those same traits would produce the most effective military strategy the galaxy had ever seen. As the neural disruptors' effects slowly wore off, Krexthor found himself face to face with Admiral Mitchell. The human leader was smaller than him by half, possessed no natural weapons, and showed none of the physical enhancements that marked truly dangerous species. Yet she had orchestrated the complete destruction of his empire without killing a single Syndicate soldier. "What happens to us now?" he asked through the translator. Mitchell's expression was cold but not cruel. "You'll stand trial for your crimes against sentient species. But unlike your methods, humanity believes in justice rather than revenge. You'll live to see every world you enslaved set free, every species you oppressed returned to independence." The Crimson Syndicate had entered human space believing they were about to claim their greatest prize. Instead, they had walked into the end of their reign of terror. Humanity had shown the galaxy that predators could become prey, that intelligence could triumph over brute force, and that the species who valued cooperation above domination would be the ones to reshape the stars. The reckoning was complete, and the hunters had become the hunted.